too, so welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Kidlit Distancing Social of 2021. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider and co-creator of writeforkids.org and writingblueprints.com. So welcome. We have a great guest tonight, and I'm really excited to get going on our first social of the year. For those of you who are new to us or watching on replay for the first time, if you would like to get on our list to hear about all of our upcoming guests as well as other stuff we're doing, you can go to writeforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet and sign up, and you will get a free gift from us, an ebook called the Ultimate Children's Writing Cheat Sheet. This is our 30th year in business. And what we have done is compiled our best beginner tips into this free ebook to help you get started writing for children. And that is yours, simply for signing up to hear about all the stuff we do. And if you are interested in subscribing to our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, which is in its 30th year of publication, we have a special deal just for our socialites. writeforkids.org/CBI is the link, and you can sign up for $5 a month. You get a newsletter, which is about 20 pages a month, full of information, market news, how-to articles, interviews. You get access to our CBI Clubhouse membership site, which is a library of all kinds of articles and videos and webinars and stuff from the last 30 years. And as a subscriber, every month you will get a special Above the Slush code for one either agent or editor that you get to use when you submit to them for a certain period of time, and you will jump over the slush pile. So that's a great deal. So now we get to celebrate. I have 3 celebrations tonight, and it takes 2 slides to tell you about them. So our first is Jacqueline Johnson, self-published her new picture book called The Doggy Doctor and the Upset Tummy. I should have put that in italics, sorry, so you could see the title better. Illustrated by Chenin Roberts through her independent publishing company, Bearded Dog Press. And let me read to you a little bit about what she wrote to me. She said, I'm a small animal veterinarian and my kids love hearing stories about my work, so I wrote this book for them. This is the first in a planned series of picture books teaching kids about veterinary medicine and pet care. This book is the story of a dog that eats a bunch of foreign objects and needs to have them removed, which is unfortunately a very common occurrence. And next year she's got a coloring book coming out and a second titled Doggy Doctor and the Broken Shell. And she also said that she made this lovely little plush toy from one of the main characters, a dog named Jiminy, and she ordered 200 of them thinking that they would be around, she'd have them for a while, and they are sold out in 3 weeks. So that's really awesome. So Jacqueline, congrats on that, and I hope those books do really well for you. Kathy Quinton just self-published her 3rd picture book, Quint, The Bookmobile Super Science Fun Day, through her independent press, Quintessential Productions. The other 2 titles in the Quint Bookmobile series are Big Move to Ronnieville and Barnabas Rides in Style. And Barnabas is this cute little dog over here. So congratulations, Kathy. That's awesome. And Dawn Doig recently published 2 bilingual books in English French and English Spanish. They're part of her growing Big Shoe Bears and Friends series with Pennant Publications. And her other book, Hairpiece, is available now in both English and French. So that is really awesome to see all those bilingual books. So congratulations, Dawn, on that for you. So I want to hear about all your celebrations. Send me your good news. You can email me at mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line. And I will feature you on a future distancing social. And it doesn't have to be a book publication. You can get a magazine article published. You can find a great critique group. You can get edits back from the editor and actually start your big revision, whatever it is, whatever milestone you have reached, we want to celebrate with you. So please send me your good news. Okay, now I'm excited to introduce my guest. Kirsten Larson used to work with rocket scientists at NASA, so she's clearly smarter than I am. Now she writes books for curious kids. She's the author of Woodwire Wings, Emma Lillian Todd Invents an Airplane, illustrated by Tracy Subisak, which came out from Calkins Creek this past February 2020. And she has two more picture book biographies coming out. A True Wonder, the comic book hero who changed everything, which is coming out in fall of 2021 from Clarion. And The Fire of Stars, the life and brilliance of the woman who discovered what stars are made of. Wow. Illustrated by Catherine Roy. That's coming out from Chronicle in spring of 2022. And she's published 25 nonfiction books for the school and library market. So lots of stuff. But here's a really cool thing. Woodwire and Wings was named one of the best STEM books for 2021 by the National Science Teaching Association, which is very cool. And so welcome, Kirsten. And I know that list that the National Science Teaching Association, you were in the company of some really amazing books and authors on that list. So I bet that felt really great.
A lot of people I admire, yes.
Oh yeah, so that was an awesome. Well, congrats on that and welcome to the social.
Thank you.
We're really happy to have you here tonight. So let's start with talking about these words STEM and STEAM. We have some new people on tonight. We get new people watching every week who are maybe new to the children's book industry. Can you give us a quick little definition of what these terms mean and why they're so important for us to know?
Sure. So STEM is an acronym. It's short for science, technology, engineering, and math. STEAM is the same, except we insert the A, which is for the arts. And actually, I think that's really cool because the more that I've written about scientists and engineers and inventors, what always really strikes me is that the creative process is very similar, whether your creativity is in sciences and engineering and design and invention, or whether it's in writing, visual arts, or music. And in fact, people like Einstein, right? He's a physicist, but also a fabulous violinist. So there's always a lot of cross-pollination. So STEAM is STEM with the A for the arts. Why is it important? This isn't the first time in American history that we've really emphasized these topics for kids. There was a big push after Sputnik launched. And some of you, I don't know if you've in my library, they still have a lot of the Read and Find Out series books, which started soon after Sputnik. And those were some early STEM kids books. But of course, with the rapid pace of technology in the last few years, there's been a big push to get kids exposed and interested in STEM and STEAM at much younger ages. And we've rolled out a new science curriculum, science and engineering curriculum, the next generation science standards, which have really put a lot of rigor into science education for kids of all ages. And so with that comes a lot of focus on books that teachers can use to supplement their curriculum.
Great. And it's amazing how you can work those concepts into all different kinds of books. And we'll talk a little more about that as we go along here. But I want to back up a little bit because you wrote 25 books for the school and library market before you published Woodwire and Wings. And do you think writing nonfiction for the educational market kind of helped give you your sea legs, so to speak, for writing, creating narrative nonfiction for the trade market? Do you think that was a good training ground for you?
Well, I learned a lot, especially, the type of writing is very different, but the research process is very similar. I mean, you still have to go through the same research process and learn how to find journal articles, how to locate experts, how to interview experts. So all of that is very similar. And, I'll be honest, one of the greatest gifts was the ability to learn how to work with an editor. I think because, a lot of the school and library books are produced on fairly tight schedules. So you have to learn to research efficiently, to write efficiently, and revise quickly, which means you can't be too precious with your words. So I learned to be a pretty fast drafter and reviser. And it helped me become very humble about revising my work, and I can kill my darlings pretty quickly and move on.
That's good. That's a great skill to have as a writer. And just before we move on to your picture book biography or your trade books, we've done some webinars recently through Write for Kids on the school and library market, and I think it's a market a lot of people don't realize is out there and available to them as a way to really not only gain a lot of skills as a writer, but get some great credits under your belt. One of the things that you often have when writing for that market is you're paid on a work for hire arrangement, which I know you have experienced. How did you feel about that? Are there pros and cons to that, getting that work for hire as opposed to getting a royalty payment?
Sure. So with a work for hire, I don't hold copyright to those books. The
Mhm.
publishing company that published them holds the rights. And that's because they came up with this. These are often written in series. They come up with the series concept. They tell me the word count. They tell me overall what's going needs to be in each book, and what reading level I'm writing them to. So they've done a lot of the legwork. So they hold the copyright. In return, I get a one-time flat fee. Um,
Mhm.
so, there is a big push when it's your trade books. You're trying to earn out. You really want to market those books. With the school and library market books, they are doing all the marketing for you. I mean, you can do as much or as little as
Mhm.
you want, but there's not pressure on you as the creator to sell the books. There's
Mhm.
pros and cons. I personally I don't mind marketing. um, but a lot of people don't enjoy it, so it's nice to know that you can do as much or as little as you want.
Mhm. That's great. That's great. I've had a couple people tell me my voice is out of sync, and I know there's a setting on my webcam here. That's why I was looking up at the top of my screen. I was actually listening to everything you said. But let me see if I can quickly figure out how to fix this. If not, I apologize for my voice being out of sync. I know that it's a webcam setting and I don't see it right away, so I don't want to hold things up. So everybody, just don't look at me when I'm speaking. My lips just don't match the words. Okay, well, sorry about that. Looks like a bad B movie. I've been dubbed. Okay. So let's talk about the difference between writing narrative nonfiction for the trade market and what you wrote for the educational market. I know that you have written some great blog posts about writing narrative nonfiction. First of all, give us just a really brief sort of sense of the difference between the kind of nonfiction you wrote for the school and library market. Was it more expository, informational type stuff as opposed to having a narrative arc, or not? I may be wrong. So why don't you first
No,
clarify that
no,
for us?
you're exactly right. So I actually just pulled a few off my shelf, but you'll see up here superpowers in nature, which is essentially like animals with beetles that behave like Hulk, and all kinds of stuff. But a lot of them, these are all expository books, and I would say even if you're writing a biography, most of the time for the school and library market, it is expository, and expository just means you're explaining something. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have a narrative arc, and by narrative arc we mean your book has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The character changes from the beginning to the end, so it's exactly the same as a fictional story in terms of the character moving through a change and there being growth and development and tension and page turns. When you're all of my work for the school and library market, it's just explaining concepts. And one thing I did forget to say, which was great training, is because a lot of my trade nonfiction is focused on science concepts, I did get a lot of great experience explaining difficult concepts to children by working in the school and library market. It really kind of gave me a foothold figuring out, how do you explain a tsunami to kids, or the rock cycle? So, I got a lot of great practice. But a lot of these books, it's almost, I don't want to, it's more like writing for an encyclopedia, sort of. I mean, you don't have, you're explaining a concept.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So when you're writing that narrative arc, what are some of your sort of best tips that you can give us for that kind of writing?
Well, I mean, okay, so I am the world's slowest learner when it comes to this. So for me, I always write what's called a kitchen sink draft. I just cannot get away from it. And it's almost kind of a cross between a data dump and a timeline. And I write down every single, fact and figure and date and name and place. And it's just all there. And once I'm able to write that down, I can step away and then I can really start to think about, what is the overall arc? What is the most important thing about this person's life that's going to resonate with children? And then it's almost like, sculpting in marble. You have this big block of facts and information, and you start chipping away, leaving only what's beautiful and contributes to the picture that you want to create. But for me, it always starts with that block of marble. I just can't get away from it. And it always takes me several drafts and several rounds of chipping away and honestly trying different structures. I mean, I never hit on the right structure, the right voice, the right format the first time. So for me, it's really always been about being flexible. For example, my 2022 book, The Fire of Stars, is a dual biography of the astrophysicist Cecilia Payne, and it's a dual narrative. So it's actually the narrative of star formation told alongside her formation as a young scientist. Well, I had finished. We were about to go on submission, my agent and I, with a very straightforward biography of Cecilia Payne, when I was inspired by Hannah Holt's book, Diamond and the Boy. I had read an announcement about that forthcoming book. I hadn't actually seen the book yet. And at the 11th hour, we're like, ooh, this might be an interesting way to tell a story. And we completely revamped the whole thing. So I really think in terms of finding your narrative arc, it's okay if it takes a long time. I think it's helpful if you can be flexible in the way that you tell the story and try it a few different ways.
I love that image of the marble and you're chipping away. That's a great way of thinking about it. So you are tackling very complex topics in these picture book biographies that you're writing. And you said the school and library writing helped you learn how to communicate complex topics to kids. Is there, in your opinion, is there any idea too sophisticated, or can you always find a way in that will be understandable to the picture book audience?
Well, I mean, I definitely have books that have been laid aside, because they just,
Mhm.
didn't, I couldn't make them work. And that's okay. Most of the time I get them to the point where I'm satisfied with them, because most of the reason I write is out of curiosity. And I want to be able to, if I can research and write a book for children that children can understand, then I've kind of proven to myself that I understand the information. And even if at that point it's not something that's going to sell, I can be satisfied because I'm like, okay, I now understand how that works. But I mean, I
Mhm.
just had a picture book that started out as a biography of a different astronomer, and I was playing with some dual layered text. That book became a lyrical love letter to science. And I kept thinking I would use the biography layer and turn it into something else, and I just haven't been able to get there with it. So, you know,
Mhm.
you use what you can and you leave the rest.
Yeah. Now, when you're writing a picture book biography, you're not really wanting to tell the person's life from cradle to grave, because that's too much for a picture book. So what you're looking at is finding sort of an interesting slice that highlights an accomplishment or some great, some period of their life that's interesting to the audience. So how do you find that slice? Is it just doing a ton of research and then something will kind of pop out at you, or do you go in knowing what you're looking for?
So, it depends. With most of the people that I'm interested in, I become interested in their story because of some accomplishment. Either they
Mhm.
achieved something extraordinary, or a lot of times, like with Lily and Todd, it's because she was first. She was the first
Mhm.
woman to invent her own airplane, to create her own airplane soon after the Wright brothers. So I knew that was going to be the focus, in terms of kind of finding your beginning and ending points. For me, it was, I had to think about what was going to resonate with kids. What are they going to see in her journey that reflects their own life, or that they can be interested in. And so for Lily and Todd, it's really a perseverance. I mean, that's the crux of her story. I mean, she worked on this for 4 years. She was not immediately successful as a woman working in aviation in the early 1900s. She wasn't accepted a lot of the time. And so really, I think, all kids can identify with perseverance and that idea of needing to keep going. So that was really kind of the beginning and the end point with that particular book. But a lot of times, what first piques my interest is some kind of success story. And I'm kind of always drawn to stories about people who achieve despite the odds. I kind of always like an
Mhm.
underdog story. And so even some of my non-STEM books, there always seems to be sort of an underdog underdog element.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's very appealing to kids, and it creates heroes in the book for them to root for, and it's awesome when it's true. That's makes them even more amazing. So we started talking a little bit about STEM. Do you? Well, obviously, the topics that you're drawn to lend themselves very well to STEM lesson plans because a lot of them, they're science, technology, engineering, often math based, a lot of these topics. But do you think about how your books will be used in the classroom as you're writing them, or do you think about putting stuff in the back matter, or that can sort of beef up their classroom use, or is that something you don't really worry about?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I would say most books, a good teacher can fit most books into a curriculum, whether it's fitting a
Mhm.
fiction book into the Common Core, or if it's fitting just about any, science, engineering, math book
Mhm.
into the next generation science standards. Um, Now, when I'm considering ideas, I certainly consider what I think of as marketability. And if a book ties into something that kids are taught, whether it's, community helpers when they're little, or Women's History Month, or, I certainly think about that. I don't think it necessarily shapes how I write the book, but it definitely, I definitely think about that when creating back matter or educational materials or something like that, because I want to help teachers fit my
Mhm.
book into the curriculum. Because for most nonfiction trade books, the school and library market is a big part of the market. It's not quite the
Mhm.
same as when you write for the school and library market, but definitely selling, you want to be able to sell into that market.
Right, right. And well, you haven't really had a chance to do classroom visits yet, I imagine, because it came out in 2020, unless you've done any virtual visits. Have you had a chance to do that?
Yeah, so I did. I have done some virtual visits. I did get very lucky the week before everything shut down in California. I was able to do a program at one of the LA County libraries where we did an engineering design program. And we used the
Mhm.
book to talk about the engineering design process and how inventors and engineers use it. And then we built different paper airplane designs that we tested and modified and tested again. So, I did have one opportunity to meet with kids in person.
Mhm.
So hopefully in the future I'll be able to do more, but I have been able to connect with some kids virtually, which has been great.
Great, great. Tell me a little bit about your research methods. People are always wanting to know about research with nonfiction, and how do you know when to stop when you have enough?
So I would say my ideal research method, which it does not always happen this way, but in an ideal world, I like to start with a good, well-researched secondary source.
Mhm.
Somebody who's an expert in the field that's really been able to sort through a lot of the primary source information, because a lot of times I may not have a lot of context about that particular time period. So it's helpful to be able to read something that kind of puts the whole period and the person in context. And then, of course, you can use, if it's has a lot of endnotes, then you can also use that to point you to sources that you can go look at on your own, including primary sources. Now, it doesn't always
Mhm.
work that way. Lillian Todd, there's no biography of her for adults or children until this book came out. So,
Hmm.
I found her name in Andrea Beatty's Rosie Revere Engineer. I found a website maintained by an early aviation enthusiast that had a few pictures of her and clips of newspapers from the Library of Congress. And then I spent most of my time in newspaper archives. So I
Mhm.
had to read other books about the Wright brothers and Glenn Curtiss and the early period of aviation to be able to fit her in context, but there was no biography of her that I could turn to. Um,
Uh-huh.
I have not, and I think it would be very difficult for me to write a book about anyone without hearing their voice. And so for me, that either comes from journals or letters or interviews. And I was very lucky with Lillian Todd. Because she was the only woman working in this field, there were a lot of newspaper interviews and extensive interviews with her. So I was able to hear her voice and hear her story in her own words. And I ended up pulling a lot of quotes and putting them in different spreads in the book. So I think for me, hearing my character's voice is a really important part of the research process. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, the bottom line with writing is you could research and you could revise forever, right? So you just have to get to the point. For me, I have a couple of wonderful critique groups, and their feedback is so valuable for knowing when a story is working and when I can feel satisfied that I can send it to my agent, and then she helps me know if it's working and it's ready to sub. So, I mean, honestly, finding critique partners to help you, because, I could, there's with, especially writing history, new pieces of information come to light all the time. I mean, the story is never
Mhm.
over. So you just have to figure out when you found everything you need to tell your story.
Mhm. Great, great. And that's a really good point about hearing the person's voice, even if it's through interviews, diary entries, whatever you can find. I agree. I think that's so important because you cannot create dialogue for a nonfiction book, but you can pull their actual words out of these sources and put them in, which makes it feel like you have dialogue in your
Well,
book.
and
Yeah.
I would also say, I mean, I know this probably sounds very strange, but when I'm doing a picture book biography, I think of it a lot like acting. Like, you have to get into your character's head and feel like
Mhm.
you just know them
Mhm.
so well that you can, live, breathe, feel everything that they feel. I mean, there's really a certain amount of getting into their skin to be able to tell their story, I think,
Mhm.
effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me go to some questions here because we've got some great questions, and I would like to remind you all, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, because if they're in the chat box, I'll probably miss them. Um, we have had some nice comments about your book here in the
Oh,
chat
thank you.
box, which is lovely. Uh, okay, so Barbara asks, she actually has, oh, two questions here. We'll ask the first one first. Do you do you mention you have optional back matter in your query, or do you just tack it on at the end of your manuscript when you submit it? How do you handle back matter in the submission process?
So I have done it both ways. I would say most typically I go ahead and submit it. And then
Mhm.
once it sells, you make decisions with the editor about what you're going to include or not include, or whether you need to shorten it.
Mhm.
I will say the most recent picture book that I'm just in the process of doing the contract on, I actually did not write the back matter, which is the first time I haven't done that. And I did make suggestions about, this is what I think we could do. And then the editor definitely has some opinions about what she thinks we should do.
Mhm.
I've done it both ways. If, especially author's notes, I feel like, that's where you get to talk about the rest of the story, everything you had to leave out, and what your personal connection is to the story. So a lot of times, if I'm going to do an author's note, I'm certainly going to include that in the back matter. Whether I actually go
Mhm.
through and do a timeline or a glossary or something like that, it's a little bit different, but definitely author's notes I typically include.
Right. In general, do you get to choose what goes in the back matter, or does the editor say, we want to make sure you have this, this, and this in there?
I mean, this is with my fourth picture book, this is the first time that we're sort of negotiating the back matter. For the most
Mhm.
part, I've just submitted with back matter and they've said fine. So this is
Okay.
the first time it's sort of a little give and take. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. And Barbara's second question is there a special format for writing the parallel narrative structure, like you mentioned
Mm.
with your one book that you had done? Or did you just kind of wing it?
Well, I don't think that I don't know that there's a real standard format. I mean, what
Mhm.
I do for a book like that, I actually did paginate it. So I said, this is what's on page 3. And then I had, the part of the star, I had to put that
Mhm.
in an illustration note, what was happening with the star.
Mhm.
And then on the same page where it would fall, I put, I just wrote in normal text, the part of Cecilia Payne's story. So the
Mhm.
illustration notes were in italics and brackets. And then,
Okay.
so I'm a bit, normally what I recommend if you're doing sidebars or anything like that is you put them in the text where they go naturally. Where would the text
Mhm.
fit? And I normally set things off in italics and brackets.
Mhm. Okay. So basically just however it's clear in the
Mhm.
manuscript, you need the editor to be able to visualize what you are visualizing.
Yeah, and the thing you have to remember is
however you can do that.
most of the time it's submitted over email, right? So I know some people have
Mhm.
done fancy things in Microsoft Word, but you're normally not submitting a Word document attachment. It's getting submitted
True.
pasted into the body of an email. So I just make sure that whatever I'm doing is going to work when it gets pasted into an email.
That's a good point. Very good point. Yes. Okay. Lisa has an interesting question here. What do you think is one absolutely essential ingredient to make an appealing nonfiction title? So I'm not sure if she's talking about the actual title of the book or title in terms of a concept for a nonfiction book.
All right, Lisa, you're going to have
So
to
it could go
tell
either
us.
way.
You're going to, oh, she says title in terms of concept. Um,
Okay.
Gosh, if I had the magic recipe, Lisa, I would have sold like 10 books by now. I don't have the magic recipe. I mean, for me, most books, I have a really strong personal connection. And I think you can, if you feel strongly about a subject matter or a concept, if you come up with a strong hook, I mean, I think that's the other thing, right? It's not enough that Lillian Todd is the first woman to build an airplane, right? That could be a newspaper
Mhm.
article, that could be an encyclopedia entry. So when you're
Mhm.
writing for kids, you have to think about multiple hooks, right? So for me, this is a story of perseverance. It's a book you can use in the school curriculum to teach the engineering design process by following her journey. It's a book where you can talk to kids about, how invention is a process that builds upon itself, right? Thomas Edison invented the telephone, but we sure don't use the same telephone that he invented. So for me, it's always, I think the key to successful titles is your personal connection. So you're really passionate about it because it does take so much time and so much revision, and you really want to make sure that you're connecting with the story, and then really thinking about multiple hooks that appeal to students and will allow teachers to use it and parents to use it in multiple ways.
Right. Now, those are all really good points. And I think that emotional connection that the reader has with the subject is so important. And you said perseverance. So anything that the reader can see either part of themselves or can see something that would then make sense in their own life from this person, I think creates that connection, but then it allows the reader to extrapolate. And like you said, the telephone was not just this thing that Thomas Edison created. It spawned all these other things. And now we hold it in our hand and it's a whole computer. And, and we see the connection going all the way back to
Right.
Thomas Edison. So, or Alexander Graham Bell, rather. So yes, that's great. Those are all really important things to think about. And then you give teachers all this wonderful material that they can use to make all those connections in the classroom as well. Okay, so Susan asks, are narrative or expositive nonfiction in demand right now? Are expository, rather, nonfiction in demand right now? I personally think the answer is yes, but what is your opinion on both those questions?
So yes, yes, and yes. I mean,
Mhm.
I think what we're finding is there are all different types of books that appeal to different types of kids. And Melissa Stewart, who's really kind of the grand dame of nonfiction, has done a lot of great work classifying different types of nonfiction. I mean, there's expository, which a lot of kids gravitate to and is great for the classroom. Is narrative, especially biographies, which I think are great for showing kids how scientists and engineers and artists and other people work, right? What is their work like and how do they function? And then there are other books like, I loved the DK nonfiction books, right? These fabulous
Oh, yeah.
photo illustrated where you could just read a page and flip the page. My kids loved
Mhm.
those types of books. And there's hands-on nonfiction, books about how to crochet, how to code.
Sure.
So I think the great I think we're really kind of living in a golden age of nonfiction where there are so many different types out there because there are so many different kids with an appetite for nonfiction.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're right. There's a market for all of it. And I think that the key is if you're writing for the trade market, you have there's lots of room to be creative, but you have to also provide something that hasn't been done before, have a new twist on it in some way. The school and library market, I think, is more open to straight expository, very information-based nonfiction. But with the trade market, even if you're doing that information-based, you want to have a hook to it that's a little bit different. Melissa Stewart writes great
Yes.
expository nonfiction that's very creative. And she's one of my favorite authors to recommend as examples of that kind of thing for the trade market if you're interested in studying that. Do you have any other particular authors you like as far as expository nonfiction? We've had people ask that question, other than your own amazing books for the school and library market, of course.
Well, I mean, those are just straight informational. But, I love Laura Purdy Salas. She has some great books, some
Mhm.
classics like A Leaf Can Be. Swirl by Swirl is another great one. And actually, Melissa Stewart has some great examples on her website. She has a whole sheet where she breaks out nonfiction based on the different text structures like list books and different things. So, I mean, Honeybee is Candy Fleming. That was a recent hit, right? And that's so. I mean, there are just so many. Lily Williams does a great job with like her If Elephants Disappeared, If Sharks Disappeared. I mean, there really is just so much. Jason Chen, he does beautiful expository
Yes.
books about the Grand Canyon or gravity or whatever the topic is.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. It's just, I feel nonfiction is really coming into its own right now, and there's so much room for it, and it can be so creative, which is really exciting. I just love to see what all these amazing authors and illustrators come up with as a way to just present information to kids. Let's see. Madeline has an interesting question. I'm writing a book of a woman engineer. Is it outdated to mention her womanliness? It was a big part of why she was successful, but it's not a modern sort of concept. So I guess I'm curious what you would say about this, but my inclination would say if it was appropriate in the period when the book is taking place, to talk about womanliness, but make it in a way that's understandable to kids. I don't, it depends on how the womanliness is being used, I guess, in the book. But
Well,
what is your take on that?
well, I mean, I would so in previous drafts of some of my women in STEM picture books, I kind of led with, my beginning, my opening was kind of, they couldn't do this, they weren't allowed to do that. We can tell that story for every single woman who's broken ground in science and engineering and STEM. So I include mentions of that because kids need that historical context. I mean, they live in a time where women aren't being told, you can't do this, you can't do that, but they need to understand the historical context. So I think you need to work that in. For me, I had to learn that was not my opening. I needed to come up with
Yes.
something else that defined them as a person, and that really
Mhm.
spoke to the spirit of who they were. Now, I will say, I just was reading Linda Skeer's Dinosaur Lady this morning, her picture book about Mary Anning, who discovered ichthyosaurs in England while hunting for fossils and kind of helped found paleontology. And I think Linda, she has some great lines where she works in the fact that, this Mary finds this huge head, and she works in that, Mary wasn't afraid like girls of her day should have been. And when she went on to discover fossilized poop, dinosaur poop, and what it was, she, it wasn't ladylike. So I think there's some fun ways to work that in for
Right.
context,
Yes.
but I don't think that's
Mhm.
necessarily what you lead with.
Correct. Yes. But I love that, it wasn't ladylike to touch the fossilized poop. Perfect. Um, let's see. Uh, do all books have back matter? So all nonfiction. I mean, it's becoming more and more common, I think, for trade picture book, any age of nonfiction, to have back matter, including picture books. Um, do you think it's just sort of a given as an author that you're going to be expected to provide that?
I think you're right that it's certainly becoming more prevalent. I mean, I rarely see a nonfiction picture book without a lot of back matter these days,
Mhm.
because in a lot of cases, because we're now telling slices of people's life, we need somewhere to kind of
Mhm.
tell the rest of the story and all the juicy bits that we
Mhm.
had to leave out. I mean, for me, one of the cool things about Lillian Todd was she really had a vision for how airplanes would shape the future, and she saw them as practical transportation and used in war and used in surveying. And so she became like one of the first STEM educators. She started this junior aero club for kids to discuss the science of flight. And I tried to shoehorn that into the draft itself. And it just did not fit with the narrative arc of her inventing this airplane. And so I had to have somewhere for this to go, right? So I
Right.
think, more and more the back matter allows you to give additional details that just don't fit
Mhm.
either the narrative arc or, whatever you're doing, whatever format you're writing in. And so you can put a lot of that information and places to learn more in the back matter. So I think it's more the rule and less the exception. I think the exception now is books that I see without back matter.
Right. When you submit your manuscript and you're giving a word count, do you include the back matter in the word count, or do you separate that out?
I separate it, right? So because
Okay.
yeah, I separate it.
Okay. Cool.
Oh, and I will say,
Let's.
back matter is also more about, a lot of times it's more about page count with back matter instead of word count.
Mhm.
So it's
Right.
more a sense of having an idea of how many pages the back matter is going to take. A timeline might take 1 or 2 pages, because then you've got to
Mhm.
figure out how much space you have for story.
Right. And the back matter is not formatted like the rest of the book. You're not
Mm-hmm.
filling the page with illustrations, or not as many illustrations. Yeah, so you can have more
Exactly.
text on the page.
Exactly.
Um, yeah. So your book, The Fire of Stars, what age is that for? And basically all your bios, are you sort of hitting that 4 to 8, or are you skewing a little older, do you think,
So,
with your picture book?
my experience with most picture book biographies is they skew older. So I think,
Mhm.
like I think with Woodwire Wings, I think the publisher put it as like 7 to 10. I think with most of my picture book biographies, I feel like second grade and up is kind of the sweet spot. And the cool thing about a picture
Mhm.
book biography is, middle school teachers can even use them to give little bite-sized glimpses
Mhm.
into people's lives. So.
Sure, sure. Yeah. But you're not so worried about vocabulary and that kind of thing, because you're skewing a little older. And if it's I'm assuming if it's understandable, if the words are understandable within the context of the story you're telling, or illustration clues, that you can use more sophisticated vocabulary. Is that true?
Yes. So the other big difference between writing these school and library books and writing trade nonfiction, these are leveled. So when the publisher when the publisher says you're going to write this freaky nature series, and we're trying to target it to like a kindergarten to second grade reading level. And so I have to hit a certain reading level, and I have to be very mindful of the type of vocabulary I use and how long the sentences are. But of course, nonfiction picture books are meant to be read to or read with children. So I honestly don't worry that much about the reading level or the vocabulary. So, you can, because as long as a child can understand in context, and they're probably going to have an adult there, unless they're an older independent reader, like in, fifth or sixth grade or something.
Okay, great. A couple people have mentioned that they've heard from a lot of editors that they are overloaded with picture book biographies right now. What are your thoughts on this?
So I have heard that too. But, I think at the end of the day, there's always room for an amazing story. So I think, I think it's harder to, it's going to force us to be more creative, right? And to innovate some more, to play with our voice, to play with our structure. I think if you're really coming up with a story that's captivating and well told, there's always room in the market for that. And I apologize, somebody is calling my house, which never happens except for now.
Well, usually that's fine, because usually my dog barks at least once, so we're fine.
It's
We're
always
fine.
something, right?
Yes. No, I
But I will
that's
also
very
say there's tremendous appetite, I think, for own voices stories, especially in picture book biography. So, we still need a lot of people at the table creating books that represent all the different kids and all different types of lives. So, I think there's still a lot of room in the market. You just really have to create something special.
I agree. Deborah asks, for STEM or STEAM, does your story need to have all of the components? Or can it just have the S and the T, or the E and the M, or or do you have to hit all of that to be considered STEM?
No, you just hit one, right? So I have a lot of I have some friends who write math books, they're fictional math books. So STEM does not have to be nonfiction. STEM can be fictional books, right? So Vicki Fang has a wonderful book called Invent a Pet, and it's about a little girl who's she discovers this special machine, and she's trying to create her perfect pet with it. But it teaches kids kind of the brain process for coding. Vicki actually used to work, I think she worked for Google. And she has a board book series called I Can Code. So those are focused on like coding. My friend Rajani Laraka writes math books. So she has 7 Golden Rings, which is a folkloric story set in India that has a math puzzle. So that's a math book, right? So she's using one concept. So I should be clear that STEM can be nonfiction or fiction. And yeah, I mean, to be a STEM book, you only have to cover one concept. There's certainly not a lot of math in this book. It's not a math book. It's mostly an engineering book.
Great. Okay, good. Lots of people are breathing a sigh of relief right now.
So am I.
Yeah, really. So I know you said you have an agent, but do you have any tips for standing out in the query trenches? I assume at some point you had to query your agent to get your agent. So any tips on querying and standing out?
I think it's just a matter of building a body of work. Like most people, I queried well before I was ready. And I queried a few agents, realized my stories were not ready for prime time, and backed off for about 1.5 years until I had really honed and polished my stories and made sure that they really sang. But even then, the versions of the stories that sold were nowhere near what I, they were nothing like what I
Huh.
queried my agent with. So, I
Mhm.
think it's really a matter of not finishing a story and then sending it out. If you're a picture book writer, have 3 solid drafts. You're going to lead with one, but when the agent says, can you send me, this is great, send me something else, stories 2 and 3 better be just as good and just as polished. And I think some people, they
Mhm.
get one story ready and they're so excited, and I can't blame them, but they send
Mhm.
it out and the agent says, what else do you have? And then their second and third stories aren't as good, and the agent says, I'm sorry, I have to pass. But the other
Right.
thing, the other thing to know, I think, with agents and with publishers too, is a lot of times if you've really worked on your stories and you're getting passes, it may not even be that there's something, you know, wrong with your story. It's just not a fit. I mean, really, a lot of rejections
Mhm.
are, it's just not a fit for me. It's just not a fit for me as an
Yeah.
agent. It's not a fit for me as a publisher. And it's nothing to do with the quality of your work. So, find a good critique
Mhm.
group. And if you're,
Exactly.
I SCBWI conferences, a lot of times you can get a fairly inexpensive conference critique with an agent or an editor, make use of those types of things. But,
Mhm.
you know,
Yep, that's very, very true. And the needing 3 finished manuscripts is with, if you're submitting picture books with like young adult novels, for example, you don't have to have 3 complete novels, but you should have your first one obviously very, very polished, and be working on your second one so you can at least say, yes, here's the concept of my second book, because agents want to represent you as a career author and they want to know that you have more than one book in you. So just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, so Bonnie has an interesting comment here. She says, I've been hearing these days first and second graders and their parents want early chapter books over picture books. What are your thoughts on that? Have you heard that
I think
at
kids
all?
are definitely moving into independent reading younger, and we're seeing a lot of publishers add new lines, chapter books and early readers aimed at younger and younger students. But again, like that's for independent reading, and the picture book is still something. It's a shared experience. So they're very
Mhm.
different animals. I mean, this is
Mhm.
not a bedtime book, right? So some picture books are
Right.
bedtime books. This is not a bedtime book. I really think there's space for all kinds of
Mhm.
books, and as a creator, that to me
Yeah.
is exciting, right? I like to try out new formats. I'm
Sure.
in the process of selling a graphic novel, right? So I mean, I like to do different things, so that I think that's cool.
Mhm. That is. And yes, there's at that age, that first and second grade, there's so much crossover with, the picture books, easy readers. Some second graders are moving into full-blown chapter books because they're reading at that level. But they will go back and forth, and there's a lot of crossover in the market at that age.
And I will say, like you'll
Um,
find in most elementaries, there in most elementary classrooms, there's time where kids do independent reading, but there's also times where the teacher reads aloud to them. In most classrooms that I've been in, the teacher's reading like a book a day, and they're picture books most of
mhm,
the time. I mean, as they get older, they might
right.
be chapter books, but typically they're picture books because again, these use a much richer form of language, and so when you're
Mhm,
reading it to a child and you can explain words that they don't understand, you're helping them with develop a vocabulary.
sure. Mhm, great. Just a couple more here. I don't want to keep you too late. I appreciate your time. We have a lot of great questions, but I'll hit a couple highlights here. Um, someone Cher asks, how do you get started in writing for the school and library market? Did you
Oh,
submit a resume and writing samples, or how did you get started?
yeah, so I started in children's magazines. I decided that this was something I want to do, and so I started studying children's magazines, pitching articles or writing whole articles and submitting them. And then
Mhm.
the book that really helped me was Laura Salas has a Writing for the Educational Market book where she talks about how to put together your package. But essentially, it's just like you said, it's a cover letter kind of saying, you know, here are the types of books that I'm interested in writing. Here's my experience. And then you include your writing samples. So for me, I kind of wanted proof that my writing samples were good. So I waited until I had a few magazine sales. And then I was like, okay, these articles are gold. So I'll send those. And then it's a waiting game. I mean, you know, sometimes I got lucky with my first break. My first break was a book called Science Fair Success, about how to do a science fair project. And the reason I got that job, you know, I had submitted samples and they needed the work done over the holidays, over Christmas and New Year's. And a friend of mine turned down the job and said, maybe Kirsten would like to do it. And so, so I was like, sure, I will do it. And so sometimes, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people get into these jobs and they enjoy it and they stick with it. So you kind of have to wait till somebody's not available to get called. And, you know, with Capstone, I just blindly put in a package, and it was probably about a year before I got called for a project. And they said, we'll keep you in the file. And they kept me in the file. So, and I'm trying to, there was a great, I think oh gosh, there's some information on my blog, but in the for writers section, but there was a website that had a lot of these educational market opportunities. And I just started sending packages.
It was probably Evelyn Christensen.
Yes.
She has a great, yes. So for those of you interested, and we will put this link in when we send out the replay, so look for it. We did a webinar last month with Lionel Bender, all on writing for the school and library market. And he's a book packager, and he mostly does books for the school and library market. And he gave a lot of information about how to submit and sample forms of, you know, what the editors are looking for, and how to put together your query and all of that stuff. So we will put that link in with the replay. But yeah, thank you for that. I think it's a great opportunity. Okay, just a couple more here and then we'll let you go. Doreen asks, how do you keep track of your research? Do you use footnotes to document material, etc., or what's your process for that?
So I'll answer in two parts. In terms of organizing my research, every book gets a huge file box where I throw the books and hard copies of whatever and drafts. That's all in the box. I use Evernote, which is, I think OneNote is very similar, to keep electronic files. And I like it because there is a web clipper tool. So any journal article, any information from museums, anything I can see in my web browser, I can clip and save to the file folder. And then I can also take pictures of pages. Oh, there's your dog. I can take pictures of pages from library books and put it all in the same folder. So I do that. What typically happens when I try to drill down to the heart of the story as much as I can. And so I really try to not focus on the facts. You know, I try not to stuff a lot of dates and names and places into my books. So a lot of times when I'm writing, you know, I may put placeholders for things that I need to go back and check. I always say I'm going to footnote as I go, and then I just get going on the story and I kind of forget. And so then I have to go back and remember where I found all the bits of information, which is good practice, because then I have to go and re-verify it, you know, and make a copy of it and all that. The best intentions.
And then moving, this is my final question for you, moving from that, having gathered all this research to the actual, now I know where I'm going to start my story. Is it a lot of taking that big block of marble and chipping here and there and here and there until you kind of hit on it? Or do you have a process that kind of gets you into that next step?
My process is messy. I mean, that's the hard thing, right? I mean, you do it
Yeah.
and then you do it again and you think you know how to do it. And then every time I write a book, I write the kitchen sink draft and then I try to make it pretty. And then I send it to my critique group and they're like, it's not working. I mean, it doesn't get prettier as time goes on. It's the same messy process. And for me, I mean, truly the writing is in the rewriting. I mean, I never find anything I'm happy with until like the third, fourth, fifth draft. I just have to keep trying different things until I find something that works. I really, if there was a magic formula, I wish I knew it. It just, every book is different.
Yeah. It is, and I think everyone has to find the process that works for them. So, and that's you put in that time to figure that out. But you're right, every book is different. You might come up with some great process for this book, and then it doesn't work on the next one at
Well, and
all.
I think what I have gained through experience is an understanding that the kitchen draft, sink draft is always going to be terrible. There is going to be a
Mhm.
period of time where I'm like, I cannot believe I have been published. This is terrible. I will never be published again. I mean, I know there will be these markers around along the
Mhm.
path, and then at some point the epiphany will happen, probably when I'm walking or doing yoga or in the shower. Like, this is typically where it happens. And I will figure it out. But I
Mhm.
think the comfort for me is not that I've improved the process, but the process has become so familiar that I know I won't feel like it's terrible forever.
Mhm. Great, great. Well, that is good to hear. Um, I'm going to give you an opportunity to give us any final words of wisdom. You've given us so much tonight already. I don't know if there's anything else you have left to say. Advice, inspiration, anything.
I mean, I just want, I mean, I think part of the reason that underdog stories really resonate with me is because I feel like an underdog. I mean, I started doing this in 2012. I did not take a single creative writing class in college. And I really felt like I was a slow learner, especially with picture book biographies and the narrative arc. I mean, that was really difficult for me to learn. I mean, the expository linked back to my journalistic experience and I was fine with that. So I think I just want to, encourage people. It is all about perseverance, just as it was for Lily and Todd. And I feel like if you're doing the work, if you're coming to craft webinars like this, if you're finding a critique group, if you're reading lots of mentor texts, if I can get there, anybody can get there. So I just want people to keep going, and believe that you can do it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we had several questions about finding publishers and agents who represent nonfiction. Go to our blog, writeforkids.org. Across the top, there's a tab about articles, to search for articles. We have some posts on that. There's also a link to our Writing Blueprints site. We have lots of stuff on submitting and researching publishers and that kind of thing. So you can find that information there. So Kirsten, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I appreciate all your time tonight, and we wish you so much luck with all of your wonderful upcoming books. And I can't wait to hear what you write next. This is going to be so exciting. So keep in touch and let us know, and we will celebrate every new book publication with you on
Oh,
the
thank
Distancing
you.
Social.
Oh, well, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful evening.
Yes, you too. And thank you all for being here tonight. And we will see you next week. Good night, everybody.